The evening was warm, the kind of summer night when the city feels alive. Cars rolled by slowly, lights glinting off glass, and the air smelled faintly of jasmine carried from a nearby garden. Camille walked toward the restaurant doors with steady, unhurried steps. Her dress flowed like water, simple yet elegant, her heels clicking softly against the stone walkway. She looked like she belonged anywhere she chose to stand. People on the sidewalk noticed her, not because she tried to draw attention, but because dignity has a way of being seen. Inside, the restaurant glowed with soft golden light. Laughter rose from tables, glasses chimed in casual toasts, and waiters moved with crisp precision. Camille reached for the handle, her reflection flashing across the polished glass. She opened the door and stepped in, ready for dinner, ready for nothing more complicated than a meal. The first face she saw was the manager. He moved quickly toward her, a smile painted across his mouth but never reaching his eyes. "Good evening," he said, with a voice rehearsed for customer service. Then, as his gaze ran over her dress, her skin, her calm composure, the smile faltered, his body stiffened. He stepped slightly sideways, as though guarding the entrance. "Members only," he added, softer now, but with the weight of finality. Camille paused, her hand still on her clutch. She tilted her head just slightly, studying him the way someone might study a locked door, wondering what it was protecting. The room behind him quieted, almost imperceptibly. A few heads turned, forks froze mid-air. A woman at the bar lifted her eyebrows. The silence had shape. "I'm here for dinner," Camille said, her voice calm, even, carrying no hint of irritation. "I'm sorry," the manager replied quickly, "but this section is restricted. Members only." His smile returned, brittle this time, like glass that would shatter if pressed too hard. Camille let the words settle. She didn't argue, she didn't plead, she simply stood, composed, her eyes steady. That silence pressed harder than any protest could. Her lips curved, not into a smile but something quieter. The kind of expression that suggested patience, restraint, and power unannounced. She adjusted the strap of her purse, her movements precise, graceful. The manager's hand hovered at his side as if ready to gesture her out. But Camille remained where she was, dignified, unmoved. Around them, the golden light of the restaurant seemed colder now, exposing more than it comforted. The door had opened for her once, but now, in the hush of the dining room, she discovered that it had never really opened at all. The air inside shifted like a tide. Forks lowered. Glasses were set down without finishing their clink. The sound of laughter drained away as though someone had closed a door to it. The refusal lingered, not loud but sharp enough to cut through the room. Camille stood at the entrance, steady and composed, while the manager's voice tightened with authority. "Ma'am, I'm asking you to leave," he said, louder this time, projecting for the audience that had now become impossible to ignore. Across the tables, eyes darted. Some chose their plates, stabbing at food without tasting it, pretending not to see. Others looked directly, caught between discomfort and curiosity, the kind of watching that is half concern, half spectacle. The man at the bar murmured, "What's going on?" His friend shook his head, eyes fixed on Camille. Under the soft glow of chandeliers, hands moved below the tables. Phones slid out quietly. Cameras tilted upward, screens glowing faint blue against glasses of wine. The discreet record of injustice had begun. The moment was no longer just between Camille and the manager. It was spilling into dozens of lenses, fragments of truth being caught from every angle. The manager noticed. His chest stiffened. He smoothed his tie, clearing his throat, trying to reclaim control. "This is private," he said sharply, though he knew it wasn't. Too many eyes. Too many ears. Too many quiet witnesses. Camille didn't move. She let the silence stretch, her gaze steady, her calm refusal to disappear louder than any raised voice. "Ma'am, this is the last time. You need to step outside," the manager insisted, his tone firmer, but his face tight, aware of the invisible spotlight burning hotter by the second. A woman near the corner whispered, "Why won't he just let her sit?" The man beside her shushed her, but his eyes stayed locked on the scene. Every word, every breath, every whisper in the room deepened the divide. One manager standing on policy, one woman standing on principle, and a crowd suddenly realizing they were part of the stage. Camille finally spoke, her voice carrying across the room without effort. "I came for dinner," she said simply, her words clean, uncluttered. "And I'm not leaving." The murmur swelled. Someone gasped. Someone else tapped harder on their phone screen, the little red dot of recording glowing brighter. The restaurant, usually a place of refined noise, music, laughter, silver against china, was now filled with something heavier. Unease, tension. The sense that everyone there was witnessing a moment larger than themselves. The manager shifted uncomfortably, sensing he was no longer in control. Camille's stillness was undoing him. What began as his rule of authority was becoming a spectacle of defiance. One woman, refusing to yield, against an entire establishment, and the room could feel it. History often begins not with shouts but with whispers. The silence after his command was sharp enough to hear. Camille didn't move. She didn't flinch. Instead, she let her eyes rest on him, calm but unwavering. Then, in a voice so steady it seemed almost gentle, she asked a single question. "Would you say the same to someone else?" The words floated into the room like a stone dropped into still water. No force, no anger, just weight. The kind that sinks straight to the bottom. The manager blinked. His mouth opened, then closed again. His eyes darted quickly toward the tables around him, as though looking for someone who might back him up. No one spoke. He cleared his throat. "Ma'am, this isn't about anyone else. This is about policy." His voice grew stiffer, clipped, like a man trying to anchor himself to procedure. "Our members pay for exclusivity. We can't just allow walk-ins. That's not how this works." Camille tilted her head, studying him like she had studied the door earlier. Her expression never changed. But silence pressed harder than any word could. One man whispered from a nearby table. "She doesn't look like a walk-in." His companion shushed him quickly, eyes fixed nervously on his glass of wine. The manager shifted again, sensing the whispers threading through the air. He straightened his tie, his chest rising higher. "I have to protect the integrity of this space," he added, voice louder now, rehearsed. Camille let a pause linger before answering. "Integrity," she repeated softly, the single word drawn out like a question in itself. Her eyes never wavered. A ripple moved through the crowd. The repetition of his chosen word, integrity, felt heavier than the policy he had tried to hide behind. It turned the spotlight back on him, questioning his motives without her ever needing to accuse. He flushed slightly, jaw tightening. "You don't understand." Camille cut him off, not with volume, but with precision. "I understand exactly." The room stilled. Even the servers who had tried to keep working now froze in place. Trays balanced mid-air. The manager tried again, fumbling for control. "This is not personal. It's procedure." But the way his voice cracked betrayed him. His words sounded less like confidence and more like excuse. The people watching shifted in their seats, uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. What had begun as a routine dismissal had turned into something larger, something heavier. It was no longer about membership or policy. It was about belonging, about dignity, about whether or not the rules he claimed to defend were really rules at all. And with just a question, Camille had made the entire room wonder the same thing. It began quietly, almost hidden. The young woman near the corner slid her phone out from her purse and tapped record. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice, barely above a whisper, carried enough conviction. "They're refusing her because she's black," she murmured, her words caught forever on the clip. The camera lens framed the scene. The manager standing tall, lips pressed thin with forced authority, and Camille standing calm, dignified, unyielding. The difference between them was striking. One vibrating with tension, the other rooted like stone. The phone caught it all. The awkward coughs, the hushed gasps, the restless shifting of people who wanted to vanish into their plates but couldn't stop looking. The young woman's friend leaned close, whispering urgently, "Don't. Put it away." But she shook her head. "No," she whispered back. "People need to see this." The red dot glowed steadily. The manager, catching the faint reflection of light on her phone, stiffened. "Excuse me," he called across the room, trying to redirect attention. "Recording is not allowed in here." His voice cracked slightly, betraying irritation wrapped in false control. The girl didn't move. She lowered the phone just a little, enough to make it look like she'd stopped, but kept it rolling beneath the table's edge. Her eyes stayed fixed on Camille, not on him. Camille didn't speak. Her silence was louder than his words. The camera recorded the way her hands rested calmly on her purse, fingers still, no nervous twitch, no attempt to argue. It recorded the way her gaze didn't shift, how she didn't cower or try to explain herself. Her dignity filled the frame. The manager, meanwhile, was unraveling. His jaw clenched, his gestures grew sharper. He motioned toward the door again, his tone rising. "Ma'am, this is your final warning. If you don't leave, I'll have to call security." Gasps trickled through the room. Some people exchanged glances, their discomfort shifting into something closer to indignation. The phone recorded every flicker of those reactions. The man frowning in disapproval. The woman whispering, "This is wrong." The couple whispering back and forth in disbelief. What might have stayed as a moment confined to four walls was now being preserved, pixel by pixel, frame by frame. The manager thought he was in control, but every second of arrogance, every clipped command, every dismissal was now evidence. The phone caught Camille lifting her chin slightly, the smallest movement, yet one that radiated strength. And in that quiet act of defiance, the seed of virality was planted. The manager's voice cut like a blade. "If you won't leave, then you'll be escorted out." Camille didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice or argue. Instead, she turned with deliberate grace, walked to the side of the room, and lowered herself into one of the leather chairs in the waiting area. She placed her purse on her lap, crossed her legs neatly, and folded her hand. She had left the entrance, yes, but she had not left the restaurant. The gesture was subtle, but it carried the power of refusal. She was not storming out, not defeated, not dismissed. She was still there, still present, and the quiet act of sitting down transformed the atmosphere instantly. The staff froze, unsure how to react. The hostess glanced nervously at the manager, her hands gripping the podium tighter than before. A waiter carrying a tray of drinks stopped mid-stride, caught between duty and discomfort. The manager clenched his jaw. "Ma'am," he snapped, "this isn't a lobby. You can't wait here." Camille's voice was steady. "I'm not waiting, I'm here." Her words were simple, but they struck with weight. The whisper swelled again. Someone muttered, "She's not leaving." Another voice added, "Good for her." The manager's face reddened, his frustration breaking through the polished mask he had tried to maintain. He strode toward her, standing above, trying to shrink her with his shadow. "You are trespassing. If you don't get up right now, I'll have you removed." Camille looked up at him, her gaze level, unbothered. "Then you'll have to answer for it," she said softly. The way she said it, not loud, not confrontational, but absolute, sent a ripple of unease through the room. Phones angled toward her again, the quiet clicks and buzzes unmistakable now. What had started as one video was multiplying. Each camera lens captured not just her refusal, but his desperation. Minutes stretched long. He paced, muttering orders to staff, but no one dared act. No waiter, no hostess, no security stepped forward. They all felt the weight of what was happening. The power had shifted. Camille sat still, her presence growing heavier with every second she refused to vanish. She wasn't disrupting, she wasn't breaking anything. She was simply there. And in her stillness, the meaning of the moment changed. What had started as exclusion was becoming resistance. The crowd felt it too. People leaned forward in their seats. The air hummed with tension. Something irreversible was unfolding before their eyes. One woman whispered to her friend. She turned, waiting into protest. The friend nodded, eyes fixed on Camille. She turned, being told to leave, into refusing to disappear. And that refusal was louder than any shout. By midnight, the first video had already spread across social media. A shaky clip, recorded under a table, showed Camille standing calmly as the manager waved her away. The caption was simple, "Refused service. For being black." The clip hit like a match dropped into dry grass. Within an hour, comments poured in. Some were angry, others heartbroken. "This is 2023. And this is still happening," wrote one user. "The calm on her face says everything," wrote another. Screenshots of her composure circulated like wildfire. By morning, hashtags trended. "Dine with dignity, she belongs." "Silent strength." Strangers dissected every second of the video. They paused on her stillness, her refusal to leave, her gaze that never wavered. They compared it with the manager's clipped tone, his impatient gestures, his dismissive smile. Side by side, the truth was undeniable. News outlets picked it up, flashing headlines. Exclusive restaurant under fire after viral discrimination clip. Activists amplified it. Lawyers weighed in. Celebrities reposted. Politicians issued statements. The story was no longer about one night, one manager, or one restaurant. It had become a mirror reflecting something deeper and older. The quiet cruelty of exclusion wrapped in policy. Camille, meanwhile, said nothing. She didn't post. She didn't explain. Her silence was louder than all the noise. The manager tried to defend himself online, claiming misunderstanding, but his words only fueled more anger. The internet had already decided. His face, captured mid-dismissal, became the symbol of arrogance. Strangers created artwork of Camille's stillness. Memes declared her the woman who wouldn't leave. Videos stitched her clip with quotes about dignity and justice. The storm was growing, and it had no center, only millions of voices carrying it forward. The restaurant had prided itself on exclusivity. Now it was infamous for exclusion. And as the sun set the following day, protesters gathered outside its doors, holding signs with her face, her words, her quiet defiance. What began as an insult in one room was now a movement filling the streets. In the back room of the restaurant, the air was thick with panic. The staff huddled around the long table, usually used for planning events. Tonight, it was damage control. The manager stood at the head, arms crossed, voice sharp. "I was following policy," he repeated, as if saying it enough times would make it true. "Members only. That's the rule." She wasn't a member. The hostess looked down at her folded hands, her knuckles pale. She didn't look like someone trying to sneak in, she whispered. She looked like she belonged. The manager snapped. "That's not the point." But others weren't so sure. A young waiter, barely 20, spoke up timidly. "The way you said it, it didn't sound like policy. It sounded personal." The manager's face flushed. "Watch your mouth." Silence fell heavy. The employees exchanged nervous glances. The truth was, they had all felt it. The sharpness in his voice. The eagerness with which he blocked her path. It hadn't sounded like neutrality. It had sounded like bias. The assistant manager cleared her throat. "People online are calling for boycotts. Reservations are being canceled. This isn't going away." The manager bristled. "It'll blow over. These things always do." But the doubt in the room was thick. Phones buzzed with notifications. Messages from friends and family. "Is this your restaurant? Were you there?" What really happened? The storm outside was seeping into their private space. For the first time, fear wasn't directed at Camille. It was directed at what she had set in motion. The dishwasher, who had stayed silent all night, finally spoke. His voice was quiet but firm. She didn't do anything wrong. And now the whole world knows it. No one argued. The manager's eyes narrowed. But even he couldn't ignore the shifting ground beneath his feet. He had claimed to be protecting the restaurant. Instead, he had dragged it into the fire. And behind closed doors, everyone knew it. The story had already gone viral. But it was a journalist's late-night curiosity that turned outrage into shock. Sitting at her desk, surrounded by empty coffee cups, she dug deeper into public records and private whispers. Who was the woman in the video? Why did she carry herself with such quiet certainty, as though she belonged everywhere? The first clue came from a property registry. Camille's last name matched one tied to the restaurant itself. Another search revealed something stranger. The elusive owner, Daniel, long known for avoiding cameras and interviews, was married. Married to Camille. The journalist paused, staring at the screen. The woman being refused service wasn't just a guest. She was the wife of the man who built the very place that had excluded her. She typed quickly, the story taking shape in bold letters. The woman turned away at the door. "She's the owner's wife." By morning, the headline raced across news feeds. Screens lit up with disbelief. Comments exploded. "Wait, she owns the place?" wrote one. "Not just owns, she is the family behind it," shouted another. Clips of the video resurfaced, now with captions that made the humiliation sting deeper. "Owner's wife. Denied at her own restaurant." For diners who had whispered, for bystanders who had filmed. The revelation hit like a punch. Their silence now seemed heavier, their complicity sharper. They hadn't just witnessed an insult to a customer. They had watched an attack on the very foundation of the place itself. The manager's arrogance looked different now. His words about policy felt emptier, his gestures crueler. To deny any woman was wrong, but to deny the wife of the owner, to dismiss her as if she didn't belong, revealed something rotten at the core. Memes spread quickly. One side showed Camille's calm face. The other, the manager's sneer. Captions read, "She built it? He barred her." Influencers dissected it on live streams. "This isn't just racism," one said. "It's arrogance. It's classism. It's all of it rolled into one." The revelation shifted the narrative. Camille was no longer just a wronged guest. She was proof that no level of belonging, no tie to power, no rightful place could protect someone from prejudice when it decided to speak. The world watched in stunned recognition. This wasn't about a dinner. It was about dignity, stripped at the very doorstep of her own home. The news reached Camille before she reached for it. Her phone buzzed endlessly, friends calling, journalists chasing, strangers flooding her inbox with words of support and outrage. She ignored most of it, keeping her hands still, her face unreadable. Finally, she dialed one number. Daniel answered on the second ring. His voice was quiet. "Camille," she exhaled. Steady. "Yes. I wanted you to hear it from me, not from them." She told him everything. The polite smile at the door, the words "members only," the insistence that she didn't belong. She described the way the room hushed, the phones lifted, the weight of being judged not by who she was but by what she looked like. Her voice never wavered. She didn't add anger where none was needed. She told it like a record, clean and unshaken. On the other end, silence. She waited. "Daniel?" He finally spoke, but it wasn't the rush of fury she might have expected. It wasn't yelling, or outrage, or panic. His voice was low, almost flat. "I hear you." The stillness between them said more than anger ever could. It was a silence carved out of resolve, the kind that meant something would follow, something certain. "Don't act yet," Camille said softly. "Not tonight. Let the truth show itself. Let them reveal who they are before you decide what to do." Daniel breathed in, slow, deliberate. "They humiliated you in your own house," he whispered. Camille closed her eyes. "They humiliated themselves. I simply stood there." Another pause. She could picture him, jaw set, brow tight, mind already moving through plans and consequences. "Promise me you won't rush," she said. His silence stretched again, heavy, then finally. "I promise nothing rash, but I promise it won't be ignored." Camille let out a long breath, her tone calm, almost tender. "That's all I ask." The line went quiet once more, not with emptiness but with weight. He didn't need to rage. His silence was already thunderous, and Camille, steady as ever, had given him the patience to let that thunder gather strength before it struck. The morning light cut sharp through the boardroom's tall windows. Executives filed in with papers, laptops, nervous glances. The air smelled faintly of coffee and fear. Daniel sat at the head of the long table, silent. His presence was enough to still the room. The first executive broke the quiet. "We need to get ahead of this. Release a statement. Apologize. Distance ourselves from the manager." Another interrupted, shaking his head. "Careful. If we admit fault, we expose ourselves legally. The manager was following policy. We can stand by that." Voices overlapped, urgency clashing with denial. "It's a PR nightmare. We can't betray our staff. We'll lose investors. We'll lose customers." Daniel said nothing. His fingers tapped once against the table, then stilled again. One of the older board members, voice heavy with tradition, said, "We built exclusivity on purpose. That's our brand. If we start letting anyone through the doors, we destroy the very thing people pay for." Another, younger, leaned forward. "Exclusivity is one thing. Humiliation is another. People won't forgive this. It's everywhere. Our brand isn't luxury anymore, it's discrimination. That's what people see now." Murmurs swirled. Fear thickened. Each argument revealed more than strategy. It revealed the fractures of the company itself. Some clung to image, some to principle, some to denial. And Daniel still said nothing. He let them talk, let their words expose them. Every defense of policy sounded thinner. Every warning of collapse sounded truer. Finally, the room quieted. All eyes turned to him. Daniel folded his hands. His voice, when it came, was calm, unhurried. "I've heard enough. The weight of his silence before that moment made the words feel heavier now. This isn't about exclusivity. It isn't about policy. It's about whether we stand for dignity or against it. His gaze swept across the table, and the whole world is watching which side we choose. No one spoke. The fracture was clear. Some faces hardened with resistance. Others softened with reluctant agreement. The company was divided not just in policy, but in conscience. And Daniel, quietly, was already deciding how to draw the line. Reporters crowded the front steps, cameras flashing like lightning. The manager stood stiffly, his tie too tight, his face pale. He raised his chin, trying to summon the authority he had once wielded so easily. "They're twisting this," he declared into microphones. "This wasn't about race. This was about membership. She didn't look like she belonged, and I acted accordingly." The words slipped out before he realized what he had said. Didn't look like she belonged. The phrase hung in the air, recorded from every angle, clipped into every broadcast. Reporters exchanged glances. One asked, "What do you mean, didn't look like she belonged?" The manager stammered, his hands rising defensively. I mean she wasn't dressed like a member. She didn't arrive with the reservation list. That's all." But the damage was done. The words had been spoken, clear and undeniable. By nightfall, the clip spread online. His face filled screens once more, lips forming the phrase that became his undoing. "Didn't look like she belonged." Comment sections roared. "And what exactly does belonging look like?" wrote one. "He said the quiet part out loud," wrote another. The video replayed on loop. Evidence of prejudice captured in his own voice. What he meant as defense became confession. Inside the restaurant, staff cringed. They knew the tone. They had heard it before, felt it before. But now the world had heard it too. Executives groaned. Publicists scrambled. No spin could untangle the truth of those words. Camille, watching from home, only shook her head slightly. She didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. She simply let the clip play, the weight of it speaking for itself. The man who once held the door shut now found himself standing outside it, exposed, recorded, undone. The press began seeking out those who had been in the dining room that night. Slowly, witnesses came forward. One woman, face pale on camera, admitted, "I wanted to say something, but I froze. I didn't want to cause a scene. Now I regret it." A man, still holding the same phone he had filmed with, explained, "I recorded because I knew no one would believe it otherwise. If I didn't capture it, it would have been her word against his. And I couldn't let that happen." Others told their stories, each one layering the truth. A couple confessed they lowered their eyes deliberately, ashamed they hadn't helped. Another said the silence in the room had felt suffocating, that her hands trembled as she watched. Their voices painted a fuller picture. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a simple case of policy. It was public humiliation, witnessed by dozens, ignored by most, captured by a few. The weight of their testimonies struck harder than any headline. Each bystander's voice revealed the complexity of complicity, the shame of silence, the burden of witnessing, the courage of documenting. And the world listened, not just to Camille's story, but to the ripple of everyone who had been present. For days, Camille had remained silent, her face spread across screens, her calm composure dissected by millions, yet she herself had said nothing. Finally, she stepped before cameras. She wore no jewels, no bold colors. Just a simple dress, her hands folded neatly before her. Her voice was even, unhurried. "I was told I didn't belong. Not as a customer. Not as a human being worthy of respect. I was told to leave a place built by my own family." The crowd leaned forward. She never raised her tone. She didn't speak of ownership, wealth, or influence. She spoke only of dignity. "I did not shout. I did not argue. I stood there because sometimes silence is the only answer to arrogance." Her words rippled outward, sharper than outrage could ever be. "What happened to me is not unique," she continued. "It happens every day in different ways to countless people. But this time it was caught on camera. And this time you all saw it." She ended simply, "This is not about me. It's about us. It's about who we choose to be when we see injustice unfold in front of us." The statement lasted less than 5 minutes. But it was enough to ignite deeper outrage. Not through fury, but through the quiet clarity of truth. By the end of the week, the restaurant's polished glass doors had become a battleground. Protesters lined the sidewalks, their chants echoing off stone buildings. Dignity for all. She belongs. End exclusion. Signs bore Camille's face. Her words. Her stillness. Influencers live-streamed from the crowd, their followers pouring in by the thousands. Inside, tables sat empty. Customers canceled reservations, partnerships hung by a thread. Even long-time investors called, demanding answers. The manager avoided the front, slipping in through side doors. His name had become a curse online. The restaurant, once a symbol of exclusivity, was now synonymous with shame. The storm had grown, and there was no ignoring it now. The employees filed into the wide hall, whispers trailing between them. No one knew what to expect. The manager sat stiffly near the front, eyes darting nervously. Then the doors opened, and Daniel entered. He carried no notes, no folders, just a presence that silenced the room. He stood at the center, his gaze sweeping over the staff. "You've all seen what happened," he began, his voice calm but heavy. "This place was built on hospitality, on dignity, yet in one night, that foundation was shattered." The manager shifted uncomfortably, his face pale. Daniel continued, his tone sharper now. "From this moment forward, silence will no longer protect anyone. If you witness injustice, you speak. If you see disrespect, you act. There will be no hiding behind policy." Murmurs rippled through the room. Some nodded, others stared at the floor. "We are implementing sweeping changes," Daniel went on. "Leadership will be restructured, training in dignity and equality will be mandatory. And every guest, regardless of color, class or background, will be treated as if they belong. Because they do." The words landed like thunder. The staff exchanged glances. The message was clear. The era of silence was over. The announcement came swiftly. The manager, once so smug in his authority, was dismissed. His name no longer carried weight, only shame. Outside, cameras flashed as he stepped through the glass doors. Gone was the confident posture from that night. His shoulders slumped, his jaw tight, his eyes downcast. Reporters shouted questions, but he kept walking, silent, pale beneath the light. The footage spread within minutes. Viewers compared the two images, the arrogant man waving Camille away, and the hollow figure leaving in disgrace. For him, it had always been about power, control over who entered, who belonged. But for Camille, it had never been about power. It was about principle, about dignity, about refusing to let arrogance define her worth. The contrast was undeniable. One left in shame. The other stood taller than ever. The story refused to fade. Instead, it grew stronger, reaching the halls of government. City officials, pressured by public outrage, called emergency hearings. Lawmakers debated not just one restaurant's mistake, but the larger system it represented. Camille's video was replayed in those chambers, her quiet defiance studied as if it were testimony itself. Then came her name, written into official records, her experience cited in draft legislation. Proposals emerged, stricter anti-discrimination rules for public establishments, harsher penalties for violations, new standards of accountability. What began as one slight, a refusal at a doorway, had grown into policy. The humiliation meant to diminish her had sparked change written into law. A personal insult became public reform. Weeks later, the restaurant's doors opened again. Guests entered quietly, some still cautious, others curious. And there, mounted near the entrance, hung a plaque. The words were simple, etched in brass. "This space belongs to dignity, equality, and respect." Every person who entered paused to read it. Some touched the edge, as if to test its weight. For staff, it became unavoidable. A reminder every shift, every day. The plaque wasn't decoration. It was a scar, a warning, a promise. The injustice that once stained the restaurant was now carved into its very walls. Impossible to erase. The evening was soft, the kind of twilight where the city seemed to exhale. The sidewalks glowed faintly under amber street lamps, and the clinking of glasses inside the restaurant blended with the low hum of conversation. For weeks, the building had been more than a place to dine. It had been a headline, a battleground, a symbol. But tonight, it was simply open. Camille walked toward it quietly, without announcement, without the noise of cameras or the buzz of protest. Her steps were measured, heels brushing lightly against the stone. She wore nothing extravagant, just a simple coat, her hair tied back, her purse held loosely at her side. For the first time since that night, she wasn't walking into confrontation. She was walking into closure. The glass doors reflected her face as she reached for the handle. For a moment she paused. The memory was sharp. The refusal. The whispers. The sting of being told she didn't belong. But memory did not stop her hand. She opened the door and stepped inside. The light was warm, the air faintly perfumed with roasted herbs and wine. The hostess at the stand looked up, her expression flickering with recognition, then quickly shifting into something softer. Respect. "Good evening," the hostess said, voice steady but touched with nervousness. "Welcome." Camille offered a small nod. "A table for one." The words fell gently. Ordinary, but the weight behind them was unmistakable. The hostess guided her toward the dining room. Staff glanced discreetly as she passed. Not with the discomfort of that night, not with suspicion, but with something closer to reverence. They moved carefully, attentive, as though aware they were part of a moment they didn't want to spoil. She was seated near the center, the same space where her refusal had once become a spectacle. Now it was simply a table, a chair, a setting for closure. A waiter arrived, hands steady, eyes respectful. "Would you like some water to start?" "Yes," Camille replied, her tone calm. "Thank you." The simple exchange carried a quiet power. No challenge, no test, just dignity where it belonged. Around her, the restaurant hummed with ordinary life. Couples leaning close, friends laughing softly. The clatter of plates. It was the sound of a place returning to what it should have been all along. Camille sat still, her gaze steady but softened. She wasn't here to reclaim territory. She wasn't here to prove victory. She was here because the wound left behind needed to be faced, not avoided. And in sitting there, she transformed that wound into something else. A mark, a reminder, a circle closed. She ate quietly, savoring each bite, not of the food itself but of the calm. The kind of calm that only comes after a storm has broken and passed, leaving the air clearer. When she finished, she rose slowly, leaving her napkin folded neatly on the table. The staff bowed their heads slightly as she walked back toward the door. At the threshold, she paused once more, glancing at the plaque mounted on the wall. "This space belongs to dignity, equality, and respect." Her lips curved, faint but real. And then she stepped out into the night, not with bitterness, not with triumph, but with peace. The circle was closed. The wound was no longer raw. It had become transformation. The city moved as it always did, cars flowing like restless rivers, storefronts glowing under neon and soft lamps, voices blending into a steady hum. Yet within that ordinary motion, something had shifted. People noticed Camille, not in the way they might notice a celebrity, not with gawking or intrusion, but with recognition. She walked down the street with her usual poise, coat wrapped loosely around her, her stride calm, unhurried. At a corner, an elderly man nodded as she passed. She nodded back. Further along, two children waved at her shyly, their smiles wide, their hands sticky with ice cream. She raised her hand in return, a small gesture, but the delight on their faces was undeniable. She wasn't invisible anymore, but neither was she defined by that night of humiliation. The incident that had once tried to reduce her had instead expanded her. The world no longer saw just a woman turned away at a door. They saw the catalyst who refused to vanish. People whispered her name on sidewalks, sometimes not even realizing she could hear. "That's her," one said softly. "The one from the restaurant." But the tone had changed. No pity, no outrage. Admiration. Respect. Camille walked past a mural freshly painted on a brick wall. Her likeness stood tall, rendered in strokes of quiet dignity, surrounded by the words, "We belong." Young artists had created it after the protests, claiming the space as a reminder of what her stillness had ignited. She paused to take it in, her expression unreadable, but her eyes lingered a little longer before she turned away. The memory of that night would never vanish, nor should it. It had been painful, humiliating, heavy, but it had also been transformative. For her, for the restaurant, for a city that had watched and chosen not to look away. Policy had changed. Laws had been tightened. Signs had gone up. Yet the true change was quieter, embedded in the hearts of those who saw her stand without shouting, who saw her sit without retreating, who saw her wait until the truth revealed itself. As she walked, the rhythm of her steps seemed to echo that lesson. Change didn't always come with fire. Sometimes it came with composure. Sometimes it came with silence, with dignity held so firmly that no one could shake it loose. At an intersection, a group of teenagers passed by, one pointing quickly, whispering to the others. They didn't rush for pictures or press too close. They simply offered her a smile, a nod of recognition, the kind given to someone who had shifted the ground beneath their feet. Camille's lips curved faintly. She acknowledged them with the same quiet grace she had carried from the start. The night deepened, and the city lights shimmered brighter against the sky. Camille kept walking, her presence blending back into the rhythm of the world, but leaving behind a trail invisible and undeniable, a legacy of quiet power. What began as humiliation had become history. What was once meant to diminish her had instead defined her. And in every nod, every wave, every whisper of respect as she passed, the truth was clear. Camille's strength was never in the volume of her voice, but in the certainty of her dignity. That was her legacy.